Today I'm going to be laying some stone on one of these pillars that I've been working on. I've been trying to get some video to show how this stone laying works, but it's such a long, tedious process. I've been having a hard time getting a video that seems like it'd be worth watching, so I haven't done anything with any of the footage. So today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of talk with you guys like we would if we were on a job, and tell you some stories. I started doing this, it was weird. I realized today it's been over 25 years. I started working for a company called JC Masonry right out of high school, and it was honestly an absolute culture shock for me. I learned so much stuff working for those guys. It was wild. I still to this day have rules that I follow in my life that I learned from working at JC Masonry. And you know, it was really a complete shock on my body and on my brain when I started working at JC Masonry. So I grew up in a pretty strict household, and when I started working construction, it was like felt like the biggest band of just lawless and rough and tumble guys I'd ever been exposed to. It was a shock for me mentally, and it was really a shock physically. When I started out, I weighed 260 pounds, and within a month and a half of laboring at JC Masonry, I had gotten down to 200 pounds just from working, just carrying block, mixing mortar, carrying mud buckets. And you know, I look back on it, and I don't even understand why I wanted to work that hard, why I was willing to work that hard. It was really just a big challenge for me, and I never even considered not doing it. You know, I got out of high school. Wasn't even out of high school, it was the last week of high school, and I started working for them. I'd get out of school early to go to work. So my last week of my senior year, I started working at JC Masonry. And like I said, I never even considered quitting. Like from the first day I walked on a job, all I wanted to do was to be good at it. I wanted to win the respect of those guys, and like I said, never considered quitting. So JC had a philosophy, which they didn't tell you when you showed up, but after you worked there for a while, you were expected to practice their philosophy. And whenever you had a new hire, your job was to inspire them to work harder or to quit. That was it. They didn't care the result. They didn't care if they quit. But they wanted them people to either be a good employee or not an employee. So like I said, the company philosophy was to inspire you to be better or make you quit. And that came all the way from the top. I'll never forget, I'd been working there for a couple years. One of the owners, his son, started working for us. And he wasn't the easiest kid to get along with to begin with. And we were pouring a footer, and we got done pouring the footer, and the boss walks up to me, it's just the two of us, and he goes, "Hey, how's Justin working out?" I don't know. And he goes, "How are you treating him? You treating him all right?" And I was like, yeah, I'm treating him all right. And he's like, "Why are you doing that?" I was like, "I don't know, because he's your son." And he's like, "Well, what's that got to do with anything?" He was like, "He doesn't get any special treatment. You either make him better or you make him quit." And he was actually mad at me because I wasn't already doing that. So you can think about that, the type of work atmosphere that it was. If the owner's son was being treated that way, you can only imagine what it was like for anyone else. And the way you were inspired to be better or to quit was they constantly rode you. I mean, it was just non-stop, just tearing you down, belittling you. You know, it's funny. I don't even know if the place could exist today, because it was, to call it a hostile work environment would be an understatement. It was the most hostile place on earth that I've ever seen, next to maybe prison. I haven't seen that, but it was a rough environment. But I loved it. It was non-stop. You were never, there was no such thing as getting caught up on your work. Like when you were a laborer, you started on the mixer and you would mix mud. That was your job. You'd mix mud. And once you got good enough at mixing mud fast enough that you could keep up, then you'd mix mud and carry it down into the basement or carry it up onto the scaffolding on a brick job. So the way they did things was that each person was expected to work past their job. So when I was mixing, I was expected to not only do my job, but then move up and do what was called the whole man's job. And the whole man, he had one of the most intense jobs, honestly. The guy on a mixer would bring the mud down to the basement, and then the whole man would be just running around tending all the bricklayers, constantly dumping mud on their mud boards, restocking their block. He just ran constantly, running around. So when you started, your goal was to go from the mixer down into the basement and take over the whole man's job and let the whole man step up, and he would start doing head laborer jobs, or he'd start setting up scaffolding, start joining work, and then the head laborer, when he would get completely caught up, he'd get to start laying. And that was the goal. as a laborer. You wanted to get to the point where you were laying constantly. So the system worked really well because not only were you looking out for yourself, trying to better yourself, but in the process, you were making the next guy's job easier. So anytime you were able to step up and help the guy ahead of you, it was technically for your benefit, but it was also for his benefit. Which, you know, what a great system. It worked really well. One day we had these ginormous footers to pour. They were big apartment complex units. I think they were probably like 20 apartment units, and we would just shoot the concrete from ditch to ditch, and they were pretty intense. They were big units. So I showed up. It was about 45 minutes from my house. I woke up at 6:30, which was the time we were supposed to be there. So I ended up getting there at like 7:45, 8 o'clock in the morning. So I was pretty late to work. And when you're pouring footers, you always worked with the owner of the company. And he was, I tell you, he was a real taskmaster. And he would tell you, he'd say, all right, today everything rides on you. And when he'd tell you that, that basically meant that you were the whipping boy for the day. And he would just be ruthless with you. So I got there late, and the guys were just getting ready for coffee break. And I hadn't drank any coffee, and he wouldn't let me take part in coffee break, wouldn't let me place an order. So it's the middle of August. It's like a 95-degree day. I don't have any water. I didn't have any coffee. And I felt like an absolute just like steam turd that day. And so they all sit down and take coffee break. He's like, you need to get to work. I can't believe you showing up late. Just get down there and get to work. So I go down in the hole, and I'm setting what's called height stakes. So we take a transit and shoot the height of the footer, and then you would take and you'd run a line between one height stake and the next from corner to corner, and you'd pound these wooden stakes to the height of the line. So I'm down there and I'm just head down pounding these stakes in, and I come all the way down this like 100-foot wall, and I get to the end and I can see his boot is on the line. And as soon as I look up at him, he takes his boot off the line, and he was like, what the heck are you doing? They're all wrong. Look at them. Look at the line. Look at the line. Look at the stakes. Look at what you just did. It's all wrong. Go back. Pull them all out. And he starts going down the line. And he starts kicking these stakes. He's like, pull them out. And he's throwing stakes at me. And he's like, you need to pay attention. This is unacceptable. So I go back and I pull all the stakes and I start doing them. And concrete comes, and he's just screaming at me the whole time. Just screaming. And it took probably I don't know, 4 or 5 hours to actually pour these footers. There was probably like 10, 15 trucks it took to pour the footers. And the whole time he's hollering at me, and we finally get the footer done. And he tells one of the guys, he's like, when we didn't get lunch, which I never, like, I couldn't handle that. So I didn't eat breakfast, I didn't eat lunch. It's now like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I seriously just feel like I'm gonna die. And I'm getting so mad at him, and I didn't know what to do. It's like, he owns the company, he's the boss. How am I, like, how do you stop this guy from picking on you? And I just start envisioning myself like hitting him in the knee with a hammer, hitting him over the head with a shovel. Like, he's pushed me into a corner to the point where I was seriously thinking about the only way to stop it would be to just beat him. And one of the guys takes up a collection. I'm like, give me 2 Gatorades and a bag of chips. I got 2 Gatorades and a bag of Doritos. So he runs off to the gas station. He comes back, and I had walked over to my truck to get money to pay for the stuff. And so now I got my 2 Gatorades and my bag of chips, and I'm walking across this field heading over to a garage. We're gonna sit down in the garage and take lunch. And Jim walks right up to me, and he sticks his hand out for my Gatorade. Now, honestly, the 2 Gatorades wouldn't even have gotten me caught up. I was so dehydrated. And I'm like, all right. So I hand him my Gatorade, and he takes the Gatorade and he starts drinking it. And as he's drinking it, he's looking at me, looking down, like, and just drinking it. And I'm like, don't drink it all. Don't drink it all. Stop. Don't drink it all. And he gets down to about right there, and he takes the Gatorade and he whoosh, dumps the rest out in the field. So now I'm like I don't even know what to do. Like, I was so frustrated. And you know, I'm 19 years old, and this grown man's about to make me cry in front of all these other guys, and you know, I would have never heard the end of it. And so we walk over to the garage, and I sit down, and he is just nipping at me and nipping at me and nipping at me. And I'm just ignoring him. Like, I decided the only thing I can do, I'm not gonna look at him. I'm not gonna acknowledge him. Like, I'm just done. So I'm sitting on a 5-gallon bucket. I'm just eating my Doritos, and I was waiting until I finished all my Doritos to wash it all down with that Gatorade. And he's like yelling at me, like, I'm talking to you. Look at me, boy. Hey, you gonna show up late tomorrow? You gonna show up late tomorrow? Look at me when I'm talking to you. And he gets up and he gets right in my face. And I stand up, and he's like, give me that Gatorade. And I'm just like shaking at this point. I'm so furious. And I just snapped, and I was like, if you touch that Gatorade, I can guarantee you that I am going to beat you till you stop breathing, or I do. But somebody's gonna die. Do not touch my Gatorade. And he just looks at me and smiles and started laughing, and he pats me on the back and he goes, now that wasn't that hard, was it? And I was just like dumbfounded. Like, I couldn't, like he just playing a game with me, and the game was to push me to when I broke. And it took me all day to break, but boy did I break. And yeah, he just patted me on the back and laughed, turned and walked away and sat back down and quit bugging me. And then the next day, showed up on the same job site, and lo and behold, I was early, and so was he. So I get out of the truck, and I look at him, and I was like, so what? Does it all ride on me today? He's like, no, I think it's done riding on you for a while. You're doing pretty good. And then he gave me a $2 raise like a month later. And it was just a wild environment, man. And yeah,